sun burns in the glowing past. Mankind caught in a capsule, bound for another time. When you were a child, things were so simple. You played with grains of sand. When night fell into your mansion, you lay down safe and warm.
For many of us today, the name Francis Pegahmagabow, at least throughout First Nations territories, still holds a lot of meaning, but also is the subject of a lot of mystery. It was a difficult era for people. It was within the last 50 years that so many of their traditional hunting and fishing territories had been restricted. Their traditional lands had been appropriated or sold off or were now occupied by settler colonial cultures. And the people were left in this interesting and difficult transition time in which they had to learn to adapt to workforce economies, but yet still maintain some connection to their traditional land. And in that time, it was a lot of poverty was rampant through First Nations communities. There was a lot of racism. That time of poverty and sickness, and that was also a time when Francis was born. And very early in his life, he lost his father to sickness and nearly lost his mother, who became so ill she had to return to her original community and left him with a foster family in Shawanaga, who then proceeded to raise him. Francis very early distinguished himself as an unusual individual, one who had great determination to survive very serious bouts of childhood sickness. Also showed many talents, great observation skills, great marksmanship skills, great tracking skills, and all of those things that he learned growing up on the land in Georgian Bay would of course be of later help to him during wartime service, and of course when he was raising his own family years later. With the advent of the First World War and that first call to arms, it seemed in some way almost a natural transition for him to participate alongside fellow Canadians. So for Francis, it was a chance not just to distinguish himself in war and distinguish himself as an individual, but also to participate in the defense of something that he loved very much, which was his country. Francis said when he was overseas, advice he had been given by his elders before leaving was that if ever he found himself in a moment of danger, that he should look around and see if there is on the ground any twigs, any dried branches, and to put a little bit of tobacco down, to pick up that twig and to chew that twig very slowly, not to swallow it, but in doing that, to take in the essence of that dead branch into your being. Now, for the Ojibwe, dead branches are dead entities, and in the worldview of the Ojibwe, you can't see something which is dead. So for Francis, when you take that into yourself, you then take into yourself the capacity not to be seen. So with that advice, and it seemed to be something that Francis said he had to do many times throughout the war, but that it gave him the determination and the belief to do many of the great acts that he did, which included often being able to penetrate enemy encampments, being able to bring back valuable reconnaissance information. So whether Francis actually turned invisible in the war or not, he certainly believed in his capacity to do that, in his capacity to be successful. Was really his story after the war that I think is most significant. When he came back, became elected a counselor in chief of the Wissahickon First Nation many times, but also his work in the community as a father, as a friend, as a community member. Those successes he had as a human being are also very important. But yet, he also found himself, again, in a society that just recognized him as being an Indian and maybe not the equal that he had somehow become on the front lines with other soldiers in the battalion in which he served. But the political work that he did, helping found such early organizations as the National Indian Government, even serving as the supreme chief of that organization for a time, certainly also distinguish him as a great, not just a great First Nations individual, but also a great Canadian. And for Francis, who never lived a day of his life as a Canadian citizen, he believed very much in the concept of what our country could and should be. And I think in that belief, in that understanding, in that wish, I think it demonstrates the potential for an enduring relationship between First Nations and Canada. But it also suggests that there are many things that Francis worked for that needed resolution, that still don't have resolution, that we have to continue to work for today.